Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Good morning once again, everybody. Welcome. Before we start, or I guess as we start here, we'll say our names and go around. Say your name slowly and deliciously so we can hear it in warriors. I'm David.
Douglas.
Manuel.
Michael.
Terry.
Justin.
Jim. Don.
Larry.
Dexter.
Flint.
Griff.
David.
Sozan.
Brian.
Jack. Scott. Tom.
Mark.
Robin.
Paul.
Michael.
Winston. Bob. Peter. Paul. Richard. Abel. Howard.
Rick.
Arthur.
Great, thank you. Okay, and our speaker today is Jim Wilson. He comes here every month. This week, a little differently than usual, the second week.
Good morning. It's wonderful to be here on this winter morning. For those of you who are here the first time, I always begin my talks with some music. So. So has everybody heard about Queer Dharma? Volume 2. I'm going to... first of all, I want to thank Winston for being so persistent in getting me to write something for this. It was kind of like pulling nails, actually. But, so it's really a wonderful collection. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my contribution practicing Buddhism as a gay man. Have people read this? Or yeah. Okay. I'm just going to use it as a springboard for filling in some of what I said in here. It's interesting about Buddhism because the starting point of Buddhism is the truth of suffering, the first noble truth, right? So everybody familiar with the first noble truth, right? By now, so that all people are suffering, and not only people, but all sentient existence is experiencing suffering, anxiety, dread, despair, all those existential things. Right? So, one of the interesting things about Buddhism is it starts from that observation, and if you contrast it with the principal Western spiritual tradition, it's different. There's a difference. The Western spiritual tradition, I'm talking about the monotheistic tradition, begins with the existence of a creator, creating existence. So right away, the focus in the Western spiritual tradition is what is your relationship between this creator and this creation. It is a cosmological consideration that is the primary focus, and from which all the theological speculation and other matters of import occur. So there's a real feeling tone, difference, kind of a different mode between Buddhism and the monotheistic tradition. I like to bring out these differences because I know that for myself, like in the 60s and 70s, I was attracted to Buddhism because Buddhism is different from the spiritual and philosophical traditions that I grew up in. There are significant similarities, of course, between all spiritual traditions, but it seems to me that the difference between Buddhism and monotheism is actual. There's a genuine difference, between the two, and I think you can sort of focus in on that right at the very beginning. Buddhism does not have a strong, what I would call, cosmological commitment. The Western monotheistic tradition has a very strong cosmological commitment. The central fact is this creation of existence by something that was not created. Yeah? So I personally found this emphasis in Buddhism very attractive because it brings it home. It brings it home to you. It's like that's this notion of suffering. Yeah? And Buddhism, the Buddhist tradition sees this as a universal truth. Yeah? So in my essay in Queer Dharma, I start out by saying that, from a certain perspective, the question of what it means to practice Buddhism as a gay man is doesn't make sense, because the Buddha said that all sentient beings are suffering, and his analysis of how this suffering happens is because of a state of mind that we have, or a state of heart mind. So that is that our the source of suffering ultimately is craving and clinging. That's his analysis. So the first noble truth, the truth of suffering; the second noble truth, that there's a cause to suffering. And this cause is not autobiographically based. So the craving and clinging that I experience, which leads to suffering, isn't different from the craving and clinging that other people experience and leads them to suffering. That is what has made Buddhism a universal religion. It's not confined to a particular race or a particular caste or a particular economic group. It's precisely because the foundation from which Buddhist practice emerges is universally applicable that it has been able to cross cultural boundaries, linguistic boundaries, and ultimately to arrive in the West. Because we can resonate with that. It's very interesting. When the Buddha was asked what he meant by suffering, he had a tendency not to define suffering, but to give examples of suffering. And the examples he gives are ones that we really can relate to. It's like being forced to be around people you don't like. That's an example of suffering. The relative you have to invite for holiday supper, right? And you'd really rather put them off the list, but you got to do it. And then being parted from those you love or those you are fond of. Yeah. And those kinds of experiences that he would give examples. He said that is suffering, and that life inevitably contains those moments. Life inevitably contains those moments. So that's not something that's confined to a particular group, a particular sexuality, a particular nationality. Having said that, I go on in my article to say it would be interesting, if that was the end of the discussion, then I'd have a very short essay for Winston, But what happened in Buddhism was that though the analysis of suffering is universal, and the Buddha claimed that his analysis of the cause of suffering is universal. It's the third noble truth, cessation, where you begin to experience divisions. The Buddhist tradition begins to respond in what I would call a non-universalistic manner. So the third noble truth is the truth of cessation, right? That it is possible to bring an end to suffering, that it's possible to live a life that is free from fear, anxiety, and dread. Pretty neat, huh? It's like this is what has made Buddhism so appealing to people down through the millennia. There you are, and somebody says, well, there was this very wise man, and he said it's possible to live a life that's free from suffering, dread, anxiety. And you go, oh yeah, really? That's neat. Let's look into that. Let's see if that's actually possible. That very attractive. It was attractive to me anyway. But the manifestation of that state, which is free from suffering, was interpreted in Buddhism in such a way that it began to privilege certain select groups. And here is where, as gay men, we begin to relate to the Buddhist tradition in a manner that needs some fine-tuning or some awareness of what's going on. To pick one example, it's the manifestation of the state that is free from suffering, which is nirvana or Buddha nature, liberation, however you want to put it. There began to develop within the Buddhist tradition the idea that only certain types of people could manifest this state. And in particular, it was male monastics, who were privileged, and other people were not privileged. Now, in Buddhism, the context of the Buddhist teaching is one which takes reincarnation for essential truth. I don't know how many of you have lived in Thailand or in Korea or in a Buddhist country, but it really is remarkable how the view of reincarnation forms the warp and woof of traditional Buddhist cultures. I mean, it is really taken for granted, in a way that's hard for us to realize unless you've experienced it. So, from a Buddhist cultural perspective, this privileging was not considered absolute. Rather, it was placed this way: in this lifetime, only particular people can achieve realization. The rest of you have to wait till another lifetime where you can be born in conditions which will allow you to become a male monastic. Yeah. So Buddhism has this very large time perspective. It's like some of the sutras begin 14 million incalculable eons ago. You see, so the idea that you have to wait a few lifetimes wasn't particularly a big concern, in the context of 14 million incalculable eons. But it does have. This doctrine does have effects. What I'm trying to get at, and what I've observed in Buddhism, is that the privileging of certain groups in Buddhism takes place in a different location within the structure of Buddhist culture than the privileging and prejudice in Western religious organizations. As Westerners, we are used to going to an organization and having them say, you can't come here because you're black, you're gay, you're Jewish, you're whatever it is. I mean, it's like right at the front door. We don't want you. Boom. And so the reason that sometimes gay men have a bewildering encounter with Buddhism is because the front door is open. The front door is open because the analysis of suffering is universal. The techniques that have been developed within a Buddhist context, which is the fourth noble truth, the path, I like the path. Okay? Those apply to all people as well. See, so the front door is open. It's only when all of a sudden you hear this idea that only certain types of people can achieve realization that all of a sudden it doesn't seem to fit. The reason it doesn't seem to fit is because it doesn't fit the pattern that we encounter in our culture. This privileging in Buddhism took on two principal manifestations. One is males over females and monastics over lay people. Right? So, let me say very quickly that this was controversial, from the very beginning in Buddhism. I'm not saying Buddhism is how would I put it? Extremely varied phenomenon. And so there are many, many, many different schools, and for any particular doctrine, you can always find a school that counteracts that particular interpretation. For example, the privileging of males over females was the idea was that you had to have a male body in order to become enlightened. Don't you think that's funny? There's plenty of Buddhist sutras which counteract that doctrine. It's very interesting. When you read the Buddhist sutras, which I do, every morning I read a Buddhist sutra. You very quickly come into become acquainted with contradictory interpretations. Of the Dharmas. So, on the one hand, you'll read in the book of the numerical sayings, it is impossible that a woman can become enlightened. And then, you move into the Vimalakirti Sutra, and there's a chapter about the goddess who descends and, teaches these great teachings. And then there's another sutra, the Lion's Roar of Queen Srimala, where's this princess who teaches the Dharma in this extremely subtle way. So I want to say at once that when I say, Buddhism privileges one, say, male over females, that there are counterexamples within the tradition. my own feeling is that as gay men, we need to access those aspects of the Dharma which are egalitarian, which present an image of the Dharma which does not have that privileging aspect. And there are abundant resources within the Buddhist sutras, within the teachings of Buddhist masters down through the centuries to enable us to do this. But it is a task that we as Western Buddhists need to shine a light on. What's happened in the past in Buddhist countries and cultures is the spotlight has been shown on those passages in Buddhist texts which privilege one group over another, and those passages which counter that teaching have not been similarly brought into the foreground. So that's a challenge. It's a wonderful task. I mean, it's something that we can engage in and do, but we have to become consciously aware of what's going on, within the Buddhist tradition and how that was structured. Behind the privileging of one group over another, and those Buddhist texts and schools which oppose that kind of privileging, what I see are differing interpretations of what enlightenment means. Different interpretations of what enlightenment means, and I guess more accurately, I would say different interpretations of the process whereby enlightenment happens. So you have this third noble truth, cessation. It is possible to bring an end to suffering. And the Buddha never wrote anything. Never wrote a thing. He propounds these four noble truths and then he dies, right? There are many interpretations of these four noble truths, and I've spoken about this before. I call this the lotus of Buddhism. All the petals of the lotus are different interpretations of the Buddha Dharma. But just to go quickly, in my essay in Queer Dharma, I talk about two principal interpretations of how enlightenment happens. And the first interpretation I call the purification interpretation of cessation. See, keep that third noble truth in mind. Cessation. It's possible to bring an end to suffering. Wonderful. So, a lot of Buddhist interpretation of cessation is that you bring about the end of suffering by purifying desire, purifying the body, purifying your thoughts, purifying your speech, purifying your activity. And purification means to extinguish, and then you're there. So you remember that the Buddha said the primary cause of suffering was craving and clinging. So the purification model really zeroes in on craving. Craving. Says, get rid of craving. If craving appears in the mind, practice harder. So this purification model has been the support for the monastic interpretation of Buddhism. So monasticism is viewed as the ideal location for entering into this kind of practice. And because it allows one the time and the freedom from distraction to engage in these kinds of practices. Do people have any questions? I should pause. Is this making sense? Okay. So you have this purification model, so. Then the other principal model that I see in Buddhism is the awakening model, and it's based on the fact that the word Buddha means the awakened one, The awakening model sees the process of enlightenment as becoming aware of the actuality of our situation. So the metaphors are like, if you're lying in bed and you're asleep, you're not aware, you're dreaming, right? So you're not aware that you're in a room, in a house, in a village. You're not aware. Well, what happens when you wake up? You become aware. But it's not, you become aware not because you've taken any precepts or because you've, become a vegetarian or, or voted Democratic or, there's a shift in consciousness which takes place. So one of the interesting things is the practices in these two interpretations, the purification model and the awakening model, are very similar. There's a large overlap in the practices, but how their meaning is very different. In the awakening model, the purpose of the practice is sort of kind of like to, shake you awake, because the principal reason you're asleep is habit of mind, right? That the mind is running on in a kind of mechanical way, and so our view of existence doesn't fit the actuality of existence. It's just running on habit, it doesn't fit. So if you trip the habit of mind, and the habit of mind is sort of cut off, the idea is that you will awake. So it's very. It's also interesting to see which practices are only in the purification model, or which practices are only in the awakening model. In the purification model, they have Buddhism developed the earliest examples I know of aversion therapy. It's like remember, desire is bad, bad, bad. So if you in the purification model, if desire for food appears, you're supposed to visualize vomit. So you go and then that will take care of your desire for food, right? So no doubt. So it's similarly if sexual desire appears, then you're supposed to visualize your object of sexual desire as a rotting corpse, putrid with worms and things like that. Pretty neat, huh? So that's probably the extreme to which the purification model goes. Not all Buddhist monks engage in that kind of practice, but there is that kind of practice within under that kind of model. It's interesting that you don't find that in those schools of Buddhism which emphasize awakening. The schools I'm referring to for the awakening model would be primarily Zen, Dzog Chen, Mahamudra, those kinds of schools of Buddhism. Tendai Buddhism would be another example. So you have those two models. Now, it's interesting for for a gay man who's approaching Buddhism, it's not like a particular school of Buddhism hangs a shingle outside and says, we operate under the purification model, or something like that. You see, so it's like what can be puzzling for a gay man when they encounter Buddhism is the initial openness, right? The initial openness, you're suffering just like everybody else, and then here's how to practice this, that, and the other, and then it's very interesting, how at a certain point, if the tradition that a gay man encounters is operating from this model, then at a certain point there's a kind of a conflict. The conflict can manifest this way, desires are bad. Okay. So, but gay men have the common experience in their lives of acting on their erotic desires and finding that a very healing thing to do. Right? This is a pivotal experience for many gay men. Right? So, as you advance through a school of Buddhism which operates on the purification model, then for many gay men there will be this kind of tension. They're being told that, like desire is bad, but their experience was that acting on desire was kind of liberating, actually. Like that it wasn't such a bad thing. And how to reconcile those, what you're being taught with your own experience can be a considerable challenge. So, in the awakening model, desires are not considered bad or good. Okay, so they are considered something which appears in the mind. Remember I said that in the purification model focuses on craving. So, in the awakening model, the purification model focuses on craving as the source of suffering, and therefore that is what you must put an end to. In the awakening model, the focus is on clinging. Okay, clinging. The idea is that if desires appear in the mind, just like thoughts appear in the mind, just like clouds appear in the sky, just like everything in existence appears. Not good, not bad. But if you reach out and you cling to them, that is the cause of suffering. So I think, was it last month or maybe the month before, I was talking about how craving is the clinging project. Just like hatred is the anger project. Yeah? Did I talk about that? I can't remember. But just to quickly go over it, it's like if anger appears in the mind, so-and-so did something to me. Right? So in the awakening model of Buddhist practice, the idea is to learn how to release that anger, to learn how to let that anger go. Okay? Then you may or may not do something about what was done to you, but it's not done on a basis of anger. Okay? If, however, there are many people who operate on this assumption, so-and-so did something to me and I will not rest till they pay. That's it. That's going to be my project for the rest of my life. Somehow if it takes 20 years, they're going to, pay for what they did to me. That is the mind reaching out and clinging to anger. That's changing anger become hatred. Anger evolves into hatred. Hatred is the anger project. Similarly, desire appears in the mind. Then if you let go of the desire, you can then move on the appearance of that desire. You can do something about it or not do something about it, but it's not from the basis of that emotional state. Okay? If the mind reaches out and grabs onto desire, it becomes craving. Yes? I want that and I will not rest till I get it. From the awakening model, from the perspective of the awakening model, craving is secondary to clinging. The real basis of suffering is the clinging mind. The reason that it is the basis of suffering is because everything is constantly changing. Everything is constantly changing. So if you reach out and you try and stop the flow of the riverine world, you've got a problem. That will engender suffering. And we've all experienced that. At a certain level, we all know that. But practice in the awakening model, what is it that people are practicing? They're practicing letting go. It's very interesting that at Zen centers they talk about practice. Our meditation is our practice. It brings to mind images of musicianship or sports, something like that. So why do we need to practice? Why do we need to practice to let go? Because the habit of our mind to cling is very strong. It's very strong. One moment of letting go, and the body learns about it very, very quickly. It's very interesting. The body learns about it much, much more quickly than the intellect learns about it. Intellect is very sluggish. the body's a very quick learner. And in this kind of practice, the progress you make is it's very interesting. It sort of works like this: that you'll be in a situation, and somebody else will notice that this situation used to make you really angry or frustrated, but you're not feeling that, and your friend will say to you, "Boy, that's really neat. This used to really piss you off." And you go, "Oh yeah, it did. Maybe it has something to do with my meditation." But that's the connection. Finding that center of continually being able to let go. Zen loves this paradox, incidentally, and the paradox is that you can't not let go, right? Because every moment is being released into the next moment completely, but we keep giving it a try. So there's and so practice is sort of like learning that we don't need to give it a try. There are other models of cessation, of how cessation occurs, and I'd like to finish by touching on them because the variety of Buddhist practice and interpretation is really quite wonderful. That there are all these interpretations. The history of Buddhism is that somebody comes along and they interpret this truth of cessation, and they are thorough enough or charismatic enough, or both. That people go, "Oh yeah, that's good," and then a new school of Buddhism forms. Nagarjuna would be a very good example of that. His interpretation, grounded in his insight into emptiness, was very new at that time. We look at it as ancient, but at the time that he was doing it, it was quite a different way of looking at that third noble truth. Zen Master Dogen would be another example of someone who put a very, very interesting spin on the Third Noble Truth when he says in one of his essays, "Impermanence is Buddha nature." So that's a very, very interesting interpretation. Because in many Buddhist schools, impermanence is considered a source of suffering. But Dogen would move to the foreground and would say impermanence itself is Buddha nature. So that's another interpretation. Moving forward, another interpretation of the Third Noble Truth I call the transformation. Now, one of the ways to gain clarity about these different interpretations is to use a specific example. And the example I like to use is anger. And how the different interpretations treat anger will help you in understanding how the different traditions operate. So in the first tradition, the tradition of purification, anger is bad. Okay, so get rid of it. So you want to develop a state of consciousness in which anger never arises. So in a way, this is a very easy practice because you know that if anger appears, you need to practice more. So it's good. It has very quick feedback. In the awakening model, anger is neither good nor bad. It's whether you cling to the anger, which is the mark of correct practice. So in the transformation model, and I've talked about this before, but the transformation model is how do you use the anger? So don't get rid of it, don't release it, transform it for the benefit of all sentient beings. So in the awakening, in the transformation model, motivation is the key. Motivation is the key. What are you doing? By motivation is called in this tradition bodhicitta. Bodhicitta. So if the expression of your energy in the world is for the benefit of all sentient beings, then that is correct practice. If it's not for the benefit of all sentient beings, then more practice is necessary. Now, one of the really interesting things about this is this is primarily the model used in the Vajrayana tradition. and also in the Japanese Shingon tradition. One of the interesting things about this is because motivation is absolutely central to these traditions, it's the teacher-student relationship in this tradition has manifested as guru-disciple, primarily as guru-disciple. And it makes sense if you understand the model that is being propounded. Because it's very easy to fool oneself about motivation. Really easy. The reason I'm angry is for the benefit of all sentient beings. It's the perfect out. I'm not being angry because I was frustrated. I'm not being angry because you thwarted my purposes. I'm being angry because and there are lots of illustrations about this. So, when a parent is angry at a child for running into the street, that's an expression of love, right? So it's easy to fool oneself. For that reason, in this tradition, the relationship to the guru becomes crucial because the function of the guru is to question your motivation all the time. And so that's why that relationship is so intense, on the other hand, if you look at the teacher-student relationship in the other traditions, like in the awakening model, the role of a Buddhist teacher in the awakening model I call creating conditions. It's very, very similar to a music teacher. So, let's say I've heard Mozart, and I want to play Mozart. So I go to the music teacher and I sit down at the piano, but I can't play Mozart. That's what I want to do. So the teacher says, well, you have to hold your hands this way, and you have to learn your scales, and you have to do this, and you have to do that, and you have to do this, and you have to do that. Yeah, but I want to play Mozart. And the teacher says, well, eventually, if you stick to it, you'll be able to play Mozart. So the function of the music teacher is to create those conditions which will eventually allow the student to play the music the student wants to play. Similarly, in the awakening model, the teacher may say, well, cessation of suffering, good idea. The way you do that is you have to breathe in a certain way, or you have to sit in a certain way, you have to observe your mind in a certain way. Yeah, but what I want is to be free from suffering. Well, I know that, but first you have to do this, then you have to do this, and then you have to do this. So it's the role of creating those conditions and there's also in the second model, there's the awakening model. There's a responsibility on the student to keep practicing. Just as my motivation as a music student may be to play Mozart, but if I don't practice my scales and I don't keep at it, it's not going to happen. My motivation for entering into Buddhist study may be to bring about the cessation of suffering, and if my practice deepens, that will extend, beyond my self-concern to other beings as well. But if I don't keep practicing, that's not going to happen. In the Zen tradition, they say that there's three grounds for practice, three necessary conditions for practice: great doubt, great trust, and great persistence. And the Americans are really good on great doubt. They're pretty weak on the great trust part, but it's doable. But that great persistence thing, that's a toughie. That is really a toughie. Here we are in San Francisco, and there's so many interesting things to do. There's good movies, good talks, good cafes, good books to read, like magazines, clubs. There's 10,000 good reasons not to practice. And I'm not being sarcastic when I say good reasons. I mean it. That's what makes it so tough. It isn't like there's a contest. It's not like there's this list of stupid things to do or destructive things to do. There's a long list of really interesting things to do. So it's hard to bring one to that level of what I call great persistence, and really bearing down and doing it. The transformation model. Another model which is very important in Buddhism I call the model of clarity. And this is where intellectual inquiry comes in to Buddhism. so something I find very attractive, but I know it's it's definitely a minority calling. But anyway, this is where Buddhist analysis comes in. All the systems of Buddhist logic and Buddhist analysis, if you go back to the Third Noble Truth, the truth of cessation, see, this tradition views the source of suffering as ignorance. Okay? Ignorance, right? Which incidentally is the first link on the chain of dependent origination. Ignorance. So if you, how do you remove ignorance? By becoming clearer, and how do you become clear? I will demonstrate, it's how things actually are, so there's some wonderful texts about this. The Questions of King Milinda. Anyone who's attracted to this form should read the Questions of King Milinda. Milinda was Menander, a Greek king who was given the Indian section of Alexander's conquests when Alexander died. And there's actually a record of this Greek king's debate with a Buddhist monk. The Buddhist monk's name was Nagasena, right? So being a good Greek, Melinda, believed in, that things had essences and, that there were real essences for things. See, and being a good Buddhist, Nagasena didn't, believe in those things. So there's an actual debate that's recorded between them about a chariot, and Nagasena, Melinda says, there is a real chariot there, and Nagasena says, show me, show me the real chariot, the chariot that is independent of the chariot we see. Is it in the parts? Is it in the form? Is it in the color? Is it in this? And it's a very long, boring exchange. But it's a wonderful historical example of how Buddhist analysis works, and there's a remarkable consistency from all the way back then down to the present day of how Buddhist analysis works. The Dalai Lama school, the Gelug school, is very, very heavy into this. If you were to become a member of the Gelug school and you wanted to, ascend through the ranks, you would spend maybe 10 years in this kind of study. So Buddhist dialectic is very, very important to this school. Are there any questions about that, or how that functions?
We're coming up on the time. Maybe you want to open it up for questions and just.
I'll conclude. All right. Okay. So I'll wrap it up. Okay. It's because returning to my essay in Queer Dharma, what the lotus of Buddhism has not finished blossoming. People are still interpreting the Third Noble Truth, the truth of cessation. So it's because Buddhism is a living tradition, and what I sense in the West is a nascent reinterpretation of the Third Noble Truth, which is happening at the intersection between the Buddhist tradition and the Western liberal tradition. I said the L word. If you, I don't know why. It puzzles me as to why the word liberal has become so such an insult, because it's the liberal tradition which put an end to slavery. So unless you're for slavery, I have, it kind of puzzles me. It's the liberal tradition which pushed to give women the right to vote. So unless you think women shouldn't, vote, it's the liberal tradition which pushed for equality before the law. That people, should be able to have representation in court regardless of their economic status. So there's a long list of triumphs in the liberal tradition which are central to how our society operates. So I'm a card-carrying member of the liberal tradition here, and also part of the liberal tradition is the movements for sexual equality, of which the gay liberation movement is is one. But what I see at this intersection, the contribution that Buddhism makes to this tradition is the understanding, the crucial understanding of how the mind contributes to hatred, anger, and ill will. This is something the liberal tradition in the West is very weak on. The liberal tradition in the West tends to look at those things as materially arisen or socioeconomically determined. And that's why the liberal tradition is so puzzled when ancient hatreds erupt. Because we thought we had taken care of that. The Buddhist tradition can broaden the understanding of where that comes from. And to me, this is I consider this a crucial contribution. On the other hand, the liberal tradition brings to Buddhism a sense of the sociological dimension of suffering, which in some sense Buddhism has been weak on. I think Westerners sometimes exaggerate that weakness, but on the other hand, I think it is a legitimate criticism, of how Buddhism has functioned in traditional cultures. There's a kind of sometimes there's a kind of complacency in the presence of sociological suffering, with the idea that in another eon or so that will take care of itself. So this merging or this new blossom on the lotus of Buddhism, isn't clearly articulated yet. But I believe that gay men can make a very important contribution to this and to this understanding or this blossoming of the Buddha Dharma. And it is my hope that we will all do that for the benefit of all sentient beings. Thank you very much. See? 12:02. All right.
Well, I'd have to go on for 4 hours. Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.